Good morning, Wabash. Good morning. And today, speaking in Pioneer Chapel is Governor Eric Holcomb. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the 51st Governor of the state of Indiana, Eric Holcomb.
Good morning. You've done this before every week. Thank you, Sam, for that introduction, and thanks also to the Sphinx Club for the invitation to get me back on campus here at Wabash College. It's good to be back, and this time it's not for a game that I usually find myself drawn to. President Hess knows that I've been looking quite forward to this day for some time. Since we first discussed it, not just because of the invitation, but because of the conversation we were having at the time. It's just a topic that I couldn't pass up to be with you and to share with you and to maybe ask a few things of you before I depart. I'm talking about a fundamental value, not just to our administration, but to really anyone who seeks to be a leader. And I'm talking about civility. It just fits perfectly with the mission of Wabash College, and I checked that out before I arrived. It's about educating men to think critically and to act responsibly, lead effectively, and to live humanely. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, or at least you shouldn't know by now. Critical thinking, responsibility, humanity. And maybe you're like me, but it's hard not to notice that sometimes those characteristics or those traits or those callings are in global short supply. Almost this deterioration of our discourse as you traipse around the world, as some do. We see the evidence on the nightly news, one side shouting down, or maybe even worse, the other side. We see it on college campuses. Here and around the country, once bastions of free speech and expression and creativity, now declared as safe spaces where competing ideas are not welcome or need not apply. We see it on social media, which is ironic. We have access to immeasurable amounts of information constantly. We're all connected. I was telling Sam, just in my drive here, I'm not taking attendance, but just in my drive here, I received 2 texts from 2 people that one of which I grew up with, shared a backyard border with, a friend I grew up with, and his son Blake Yearling plays baseball here. Blake, are you here or are you present? Good. I'll let Dad know. Plays baseball here. And then Brandon Ping. Are you here? Brandon Ping? Brandon Ping, all right. Know your mom. Heard from both of these people who I've known for years and years and years and years. And it just proved to me or illustrated that today we live in a world where at times there seems to be no more borders because we're connected in this social media, as I referred to, and that access to countless channels. And yet we find ourselves sometimes just tuning into our own channel, which becomes our own echo chamber. And we see folks who just follow the herd, so to speak, people that we only agree with. And thus, again, we hear the same thing repeated over and over and over again. And sadly, we see it when men and women are targeted for maybe what they look like, or we find ourselves in a chapel, maybe how or who they pray to, if they pray at all, or for who they love. And I would submit to you all that these aren't Hoosier values, and that's not a rhetorical bumper sticker slogan. These aren't the values that made Indiana, that pioneered and powered our state forward as we forged our way out of a forest, determined to create our own destiny. That's one of the reasons that I support passing a biased crime law here in Indiana. Now, we've had a state policy in place for a number of years, and it's served us well. It's worked. But I think the time is right for this very policy that's been in our administration, again, at the state level, state government, to apply for all of Indiana. And I know this law will not stop evil in its tracks, but at least we all will know, and they, whoever is tuning in, it should be clear to all that we will, our state, stand with victims. And I believe it's time now for Indiana to be one of 46 states with biased crimes legislation, not one of 5 without. We're also seeing a lack of civility in my industry. I'm, of course, referring to governing, and it's getting louder and louder now that we're 5 days outside of an election. And again, at times, it just seems like we're experiencing or hearing, seeing too much shouting, not enough listening, too much finger pointing, not enough finding common ground and working together to move the ball down the field, so to speak. Realize those solutions that we have rattling around up in our heads. This presents an enormous opportunity for us, Indiana, to set a better tone on higher ground and not let those who we disagree with ever become sworn enemies. It may be the opposition from topic to topic, but never enemies. This isn't to say we abandon or we give up on our long-held beliefs or the principles of which we subscribe to. But we need to challenge ourselves to step back, listen, actually hear what each other is saying, and more than consider other people's viewpoints. Now, I don't want to be too dreary on a day like today about things, because our country has found ourselves in this situation time and time again. The Civil War comes to mind. I studied that at another small liberal arts college you may not have heard of, Hanover College. Just a little respect. I got a coach and an assistant coach that. Thank you, Coach Rummer. I studied the Civil War and the Reconstruction era. And then you fast forward some 100 years, a century later, and there was also national turmoil during the 1960s and a real struggle for civil rights. You just think about the 60s. Think about in 1963 and in 1968 and then in 1968 again. A president of the United States assassinated. A senator running for the presidency. The civil rights leader of the world slain, all taken from us inside of one decade. Now rewind, I'm going to jump around here a little bit, but rewind. Now I get the context here to 100 years prior. 1856, you've all probably read or studied the famous story about Charles Sumner, a United States Senator from Massachusetts, who was caned on the Senate floor by a congressman from South Carolina, Preston Brooks. Caned on the United States Senate floor. Can you imagine with the coverage we have today if a congressman walked over to the Senate and caned a United States senator from Massachusetts? And perhaps in maybe the understatement of the 19th century, that beating was described as a, quote, breakdown of reasoned discourse. You think? Rewind even further back. Our founding fathers were vicious, to put it politely, in their attacks of one another. The very people who wrote it down, who sought to form a more perfect union. You could throw a dart at our founding fathers and track any of them, but take John Adams, one of my favorites. Adams said that Ben Franklin's life was, quote, one continued insult to good manners and decency. Of George Washington, Adams says, quote, he's too illiterate, unlearned, and unread for his station. Of Thomas Paine, he said, a poor, ignorant, malicious, crapulous mass. So much for common sense. And you do not want to know what he said about Alexander Hamilton. I'll put it this way, it involves a disease in the world's oldest profession. So you'll have to Google it. And speaking of Hamilton, the vice president of the United States shot him. Aaron Burr took his life. Not exactly a civilized way of ending a disagreement. Now, they might have said that this was an honorable alternative to settle a score. But I guess we can leave that up to the eye of the beholder. Pages in our history books, even Broadway musicals, record the petty, uncivil attacks that our founders had on one another. But today's incivility seems to be, for some of the reasons I alluded to earlier, seems to be magnified. In part, again, because of that 24/7 news cycle is adding fuel to the duel, so to speak. Hot takes and high volume have replaced honest debate, deeply layered debate, which you learn about here. The talking heads are clogging the airwaves and are more interested in stoking an incendiary quip that will, they hope, go viral. They're more concerned about that than I think they are in changing minds or building consensus. Because politics, to be frank, has become a sport to some, away from its true meaning. We root for players who only wear our jersey and against those who wear the other jerseys. At times this take no prisoners approach is counterproductive and could be dangerous. It prevents us from making progress on the real issues that we need to tackle, whether it's as a state or a country or a city, a county, or even prevents us, as dare I say, as a people from realizing our true potential. And by the way, this increase in polarization, it certainly isn't exclusive to the United States. We are, sorry to break it to you, but we are not special. Look at Egypt or France or Brazil or nearly any other country on the planet. We have plenty of examples. Just a couple weeks ago, really, I had the opportunity to visit with Juan Manuel Santos, the former president of Colombia. He was in Indiana to deliver a lecture at some school down the road in Greencastle. I can't remember. A couple weeks early for the Monon Bell game, I guess. But to give you an idea, President Santos, he's the guy who busted up the drug cartels. This is in the 90s, and to a large extent, the guerrilla wars in the Colombian jungles. He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his Herculean efforts. With enemies like drug cartels and guerrilla groups, you can imagine the president knows a thing or two about incivility or insecurity the very reasons why he had 24/7 security. And given all that, given everything that he led and endured, he told me to my face, he told me that taking on the cartels wasn't the most difficult thing he did as president. He said it was dealing with the polarization. Politics, at its core, is an exercise in transactions, and it's difficult to work in good faith in an increasingly polarized society, no matter how big or small that society is. That was true for President Santos, true in Egypt, true in France, true for Democrats and Republicans here, at home, and everywhere around the country. The good news is, in these places, our nation's capital included, they can learn from Indiana. They can learn from our experience. In fact, not arrogantly, but I proudly refer to it as the Indiana way. In Indiana, our debates, while they have been lively, as of late, have been civil. And because of it, we stand out as a good example. Something, again, that is in short supply. And it just reinforces that these two traits aren't mutually exclusive. Vigorous debate over tough issues doesn't make us weaker, just the opposite. It makes us stronger. And civility has never been, and it's not now or ever will be, just an end in itself. It's not rhetorical, it's practical. It's about assembling a team, taking advantage of diverse talents and roles and ideas, and getting things done. That's why I'm so optimistic when I see you, this chapel full of leaders. I don't want to digress, but I was speaking abroad on an economic trade mission in Europe, and I was, you might say, bragging about the Indiana way, bragging about our people and our aspirations, where we were taking the state. We, the people, were taking our state. And the person on the other side of the table said, Eric, you know, he appreciated my optimism, and he said, but Eric, you know that the definition of an optimist is a poorly informed pessimist. Which was the most cynical thing I think I'd ever heard in my life. And I remember this discussion, and I was talking about how I'm not going there. We're not going there. And he said it in a good-natured way. But this is why I'm so optimistic, why I literally wanted to run to get here, to be with you all specifically, knowing of the heritage of this school, knowing of the footsteps that you were following in, imagining where not just I've been associated with state government for much of the last 15 years, but where we will be on your watch in 15 years from today because of you. And so it requires us, if it's a place where we will be proud of, it requires us to treat people with respect. to be civil, even if they go to DePaul. I mean, and I will lead by example. This is coming from a Hanover guy. Because the president, like the mayor, like the coach, I mean, those standards, those expectations are set at the top. But they always include you along the way. You are the common denominator in any and every organization. This is why I've made civility a cornerstone of the foundation of which my whole administration rests on, all the pillars, everything that we seek to do. It all is supported by, not just rests, it's supported by that foundation of civility. I expect it. I require it. Every single person on our staff knows it. In fact, they're probably there because they're drawn to it. And if you specifically ever think that I or we have crossed the line, you hold us accountable. That's the other part of this. Participation and requirement is that you hold our feet to the fire. Again, this is not rhetorical, because we are in a unique time here in Indiana, and you are going to co-author this next chapter and the chapter after that and the chapter after that. This time flies. The world continues to get smaller and smaller, and time goes faster and faster. I use the example of one day I'm playing in my backyard with my friend, and the next day his son is in the chapel. And so, because of all these reasons, and knowing that there is important work, complex work to be done. If we're going to take Indiana to the next level, if we're going to take Wabash to the next level of college, if we're going to take Wabash, the city, to the next level, it requires greater participation. It requires that civility. And we don't have a moment to lose. We don't have an idea, maybe more importantly, to lose. I'm well aware that being civil towards each other will not erase our differences. I hope you don't think I'm naive. I get it. But it's been my experience, and mentors and coaches, folks who have gone before me, their experience, that it does keep our compass pointed in the right direction to solving problems. And there's multiple ways, but there's certainly one easy way for you all to get started. And that's to vote next week, if you haven't already. I don't care who you vote for. I mean, if you want some recommendations, I can stick around after. I mean, I got. But just vote. That's the minimum. And don't disengage after Election Day. Stay involved, especially aspire to take yourself, this special institution, our state, to the next level. Don't be tempted to just become another loud voice, a complainer. Seek to be, as Teddy said, in the arena. Be part of the solution. And civility and accountability, that's how we will take ourselves to the next level. Thank you all very much for having me.